Venezuela has initiated criminal proceedings against the individuals involved in the seizing of its gold reserves. Russia has rejected any attempt at foreign interference following its referendum on constitutional amendments. A second wave of Locust threatens to consume East African crops, sparking fears over food shortages. From the headquarters of Telesur English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South, and I'm Katrina Goss. We begin in Venezuela, where Attorney General Tariq William Saab announced that his office had initiated criminal proceedings against those directly implicated in the theft of Venezuela's gold reserves deposited in the Bank of England. During a press conference on Friday, the Attorney General noted that the prosecutor's office had called on the competent court to issue an arrest warrant and freeze the assets of those citizens who make up the criminal group that awarded themselves the right to illegally represent Venezuela internationally. The Attorney General mentioned several individuals, all members of the so-called ad hoc board of directors of the Central Bank of Venezuela, the illegitimate body appointed by opposition lawmaker Juan Guaido. And the Venezuelan Attorney General stressed that the theft of Venezuela's gold is part of the strategy of the United States and its allies to take control of the country's assets.
That was the excuse to create a parapet of a fictitious government called interim. All these stupid adjectives. That was the excuse that the government of the United States of America and the Donald Trump administration found, together with it, stooges in the European Union, to plunder Venezuela's resources, its wealth, its assets held abroad, and simply commit a theft from the people of Venezuela. That was the excuse. To all these criminals who acted in favor of the interest of foreign powers, who have conspired to make our people suffer amidst the COVID-19 pandemic, amidst the well-known searching for supplies given a scarcity of food, medicines and gasoline, and who have enriched themselves by attacking the country, are accused of the crimes of treason against the homeland, usurpation of functions, and criminal association.
The Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Ralph Gonsalves, assumed the chairmanship of the Caribbean community for the next 6 months on Friday, in a context marked by the COVID-19 pandemic in the region. Prime Minister of Barbados, Mia Mottley, handed over the responsibility in the 20th special meeting of CARICOM heads held via video conference. According to the Pueblo Group of the new presidency, the region will assume responsibility for integration, solidarity and resilience in times of necessary leadership to address the current health, economic, social, environmental and political crisis. The virtual meeting analysed issues of great impact for the region, such as the joint response to the COVID-19 pandemic, with more than 8,300 cases reported among CARICOM member states.
If ever there was a time that we understood the importance of these regional institutions, it is now. Every day, countries across this region can manage who comes in and out of their borders with the assistance of impacts. Impacts has made a difference from Bahamas in the north to Guyana and Suriname in the south, from Barbados in the east to Belize in the west. It has allowed us to help screening and to be able to deal with what none of us ever contemplated would be our reality. Closed borders not only to the international community, but to each other.
Our CARICOM has chalked up impressive achievements in its 4 pillars of integration: functional cooperation, coordination of foreign policy, security collaboration, and economic integration, including single market trading arrangements. In the early days of COVID-19, our colleague, Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley of Trinidad and Tobago, perhaps with only a touch of hyperbole, affirmed that, quote, CARICOM is the antidote to COVID-19, unquote.
With less than 1,000 registered novel coronavirus cases and just 27 deaths, Uruguay is a notable exception in a region that has become the epicenter of the global health crisis. While its land borders with Argentina and Brazil remain closed, the country is preparing to resume international air travel from certain countries. Uruguay currently has just 83 active cases, while its giant neighbor Brazil is the world's worst hit country after the United States. This success is especially remarkable as there was never an official lockdown imposed in the country. And our correspondent in Havana, Laura Palmero, brings us a roundup of news from the Caribbean region.
Thanks for the contact. These are the most recent stories and news from Caribbean countries. And let's start with St. Lucia, where the government has announced new and updated protocols for the arrival of airplanes on July 9, 2020. Following a reassessment of travel protocols based on market conditions, the government of St. Lucia will request to obtain a negative PCR test within 7 days of travel unless they are arriving from countries in the travel bubble designated by the government of St. Lucia. Visitors traveling only from destinations that have zero or low instance of COVID-19 cases will be exempt from the 7-day pre-testing requirement. Visitors will be required to follow the local regulations in St. Lucia, including the wearing of masks during on-island transportation and when in public places. Visitors are advised to also check with accommodation properties regarding individual household safety and wellness policies. Cuban authorities insisted on demanding control, strict surveillance and observance of epidemiological measures due to the complexity and high risk of COVID-19 poses. Despite the country has been showing favorable results, Dr. Francisco Duran, National Director of Epidemiology Department at the Ministry of Public Health, commented on the decision that Havana will begin moving on the first stage of post-COVID-19 recovery this Friday, while the rest of Cuban provinces will move to the second stage of recovery, except Matanzas, which will do so soon. The specialist pointed out that a significant number of those patients infected with COVID-19 do not show symptoms, something that has not happened with other kinds of respiratory virus. Cuba reported 5 cases last Thursday, totaling 2,353 cases since the first case of the virus was detected on March 11. The government of Belize is entering the third phase of a tourism reopening strategy, and Philip S. W. Godson International Airport will reopen on August 15, 2020, announced the Prime Minister Dean Barrow. Open entry will apply for charter flights, private aviation, and the limited reopening of international leisure travel for visitors staying at approved hotels only. The first group of properties to reopen all will be full service and have met the government's new tourism gold standard. Though dates haven't been announced for phases 4 and 5, phase 4 will be set to full reopening of the overnight tourism sector. Phase 5 will involve the return of cruise ships. These are the most recent stories from Caribbean news. Let's go back with you in the studio.
Thank you, Laura, and we're taking a very short break now, so don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. We continue in Russia, where authorities have rejected any attempt at foreign interference following the referendum on constitutional amendments. Referring to the referendum that concluded on Wednesday after 7 days of voting, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said that Moscow was well aware of the concerns expressed abroad regarding the constitutional amendments, but is not willing to negotiate them. Peskov reiterated Russia's right to self-determination. The official highlighted that Russia will always respect international law and at the same time will continue being faithful to its own sovereignty. And Russian President Vladimir Putin signed a decree on Friday to enact the constitutional amendments approved by the majority of Russians in a week-long nationwide vote.
Russian citizens made their choice. According to this decision, I signed a decree ordering to promulgate the Constitution with adopted amendments. The amendments come into force. They come into force without overstating it at the people's will. The results have shown a high level of society's unification when it comes to the key questions of national importance. In this connection, I address the government, heads of the regions and lawmakers. The priorities and values that our citizens voted for should be implemented entirely.
And Russia has decided to reopen its embassy in Libya, although it will temporarily be based in Tunisia, according to Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. The embassy's planned reopening comes amid the continued conflict between the UN-backed government of National Accord and the Libyan National Army based in the east of the country. Lavrov stated on Friday that a ceasefire in the Libyan conflict, proposed by Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, alongside Commander Khalifa Haftar, who leads the Libyan National Army in Cairo on June 6, was in accordance with decisions taken at an international conference in Berlin regarding the situation in the North African country. The decision to reopen the embassy was announced at the beginning of a meeting with the Speaker of Libya's Eastern Parliament, Aguilar Saleh. This Friday, July 3rd, supporters of Julian Assange are holding a global vigil to celebrate his 49th birthday and to revive calls for his release. Assange is awaiting the outcome of an extradition trial to the United States in a UK prison. In this context, the network of intellectuals, artists and social movements in defence of humanity published an open letter demanding his release and insisting on respect for due process while rejecting attempts to extradite him. Meanwhile, Julian's mother, Christine Assange, said on Twitter that the best birthday present that could be given to her son would be for every voter to call on their parliamentary representative to act to end this brutal persecution against the journalist. German Chancellor Angela Merkel said Friday she was keen for a quick agreement on a recovery fund aimed at pulling the European Union out of the coronavirus recession, arguing that every day counts.
Our common goal is to reach an agreement on European Union budgeting as soon as possible, perhaps even more before the summer break. However, I also say that the road is stony and a lot of goodwill and readiness to compromise for all sides will be required to achieve our aim. But in view of the current economic development, time is pressing and every day counts. The situation is exceptional, so it requires an exceptional effort. And working for an economically and socially strong and united Europe is also a decisive political instrument against populists, against anti-democratic forces, radical and authoritarian movements.
Greenpeace activists hung a banner demanding a future without coal power from the German Parliament building on Thursday after the government passed a law to end the use of coal-fired power generation by 2038, which they stress is far too slow.
This coal law, which is being passed in Parliament today, is a historic mistake. It conceals climate protection, it runs counter the Paris Climate Agreement, and it gives billions to coal mine operators, who for that reason only power with very few power stations. There is no problem in moving to 100% renewable energy by 2030. This is our message to the German people today. And we are critical of what is being adopted today by the parliamentarians, a coal law that is not adapted to meet the requirements of the Paris Climate Agreement.
Portuguese authorities announced an economic package to bail out TAP Air Portugal Airlines late Thursday, including a larger stake for the Portuguese government. The airline has been hit hard by the downturn following the outbreak of the coronavirus pandemic. Portuguese Minister of Infrastructure, Pedro Nuno Santos, noted that TAP Airlines had recorded negative capital of €580 million. The Portuguese government will now invest €55 million, increasing its stake from 50% to 72%. Meanwhile, 5% of the share capital continues to be held by airline employees. The agreement was reached with TAP's main shareholder, David Neilman, in order to secure operations. More than 20 countries have welcomed the adoption of the law on safeguarding national security in the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region by China's top legislature during the 44th session of the United Nations Human Rights Council. The total number of countries who support China's adoption of Hong Kong-related law has risen to more than 70. During Wednesday and Thursday's UN sessions, the representative of Russia firmly supported China's implementation of the one country, two systems principle, saying that Hong Kong affairs are entirely China's internal affairs. North Korea, Venezuela and Cameroon also voiced firm opposition to the use of Hong Kong or Xinjiang to interfere in China's internal affairs. Meanwhile, representatives from Ethiopia, Ivory Coast and Madagascar have said that the UN Human Rights Council should follow the principles of objectivity, impartiality, depoliticization and non-selectivity in order not to politicize or adopt double standards on human rights issues. Thailand's main international airport unveiled rapid coronavirus tests on Friday for some overseas arrivals after a 3-month ban on foreign visitors was partially lifted this month. Thailand is allowing in some groups of foreigners after more than 5 weeks with no recorded locally community-transmitted cases of the virus. Business travellers, diplomats and government guests staying for less than 14 days are considered fast-track travellers who will be swab tested for the virus on arrival at the airport to ensure they are infection-free before entry. An official of Thailand's Disease Control Department explained that the test takes around an hour and a half and costs $96. The government is considering a plan to open more international travel through arrangements with some other countries in September, according to a spokesman for the task force on the disease. We have more stories coming up after this final short break, so stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. As a second wave of locusts threatens to consume East African crops, scientists in a Nairobi lab are experimenting with new ways to kill the insects. According to experts, the current swarms are the worst for 3 generations, encouraged by unseasonably wet weather and spread by a record number of cyclones. According to the World Bank, the destructive pests could cost East Africa and Yemen $8.5 billion this year. Locusts are usually controlled by spraying them with pesticides before they can fly, but the chemicals can harm other insects and the environment. For that reason, scientists at Kenya's International Centre of Insect Physiology and Ecology are experimenting with biopesticides and the use of locusts as human and animal food as they seek environmentally friendly extermination methods.
Where the locust swarms are actually prevailing, a lot of people are eating them. So we think with this background, we think it's something to promote so that a lot more people should engage in this practice rather than shying away thinking that it is a primitive man's food.
Local officials reported on Friday that armed men had killed at least 30 people in Mali in simultaneous attacks on several villages in the centre of the country. The attacks took place on Wednesday in the Bankas region, but were not immediately confirmed because of the difficulty in accessing information from the area. Officials did not immediately blame any group, but central Mali has become one of the flashpoints of the country's conflict, with regular jihadist attacks and intercommunal fighting between different ethnic groups. The attack left at least 30 dead, including women, children and the elderly, while many are missing. Hundreds of people attended the funeral service of 8 men in Guinea's capital, Conakry, on Thursday. Opposition figures have claimed they were murdered by security forces during a rally against President Alpha Condé.
Today, nearly 200 young people under the age of 20 were murdered at close range. That's dramatic. But the other tragedy is that there is never justice. There is not even compassion on the part of those who are supposed to protect citizens. There is total impunity for the perpetrators of these crimes, and it continues. This Alpha Condé power is killing the Guineans, thinking they will discourage the others. No. We are going to bury these people. Tomorrow again, July 8th, we are going to come out again. We are going to come out to demand democracy, to demand freedom, to demand justice for our friends who have been cruelly murdered. The responsibility to return our country to the people is now the contract that we bind us to these martyrs, and we must stand firm, for their souls to rest in peace. so that they didn't die in vain, so that we can honor and do justice tomorrow, because justice must be done for all those families and all those martyrs.
Prime Minister of the Ivory Coast, Amadou Gon Coulibaly, returned from France on Thursday after 2 months of absence due to medical treatment. The Prime Minister was received at the airport by Ivorian President Alassane Ouattara. Amadou stressed that he was back to take his place alongside the President to continue the task of developing the country. On May 2nd, the PM travelled to France for treatment of a heart condition. He previously had a heart transplant in 2012. In South Africa, the Nasrec Expo Centre in Johannesburg is now a quarantine and isolation facility for people who have tested positive for COVID-19 and have no place to self-isolate. Patients are referred to the centre by a doctor so as not to infect their family members at home. According to a member of the Executive Committee for Health, Bandulu Masuku, most of the cases are stable patients who don't require much medical intervention except observation. Masuku added that the centre is preparing for an increase in cases and putting up extra hospital beds for patients that will require further intervention. South Africa has now reported more than 168,000 coronavirus cases, the highest number on the African continent.
Here are patients that in essence don't require much medical intervention except observations that will be done in the morning in terms of temperature and also other vital signs. So in these types of facilities, it's only very much stable actually patients. But we are not ruling out the fact that we might have to at some point escalate the service, as we are putting up extra hospital beds for patients that will be requiring intervention. It might mean that if the numbers increase, we might need to increase the capacity here.
Myanmar authorities have reported over 160 fatalities following a landslide at a jade mine as the search efforts continue for a second day. A heap of mining waste collapsed into a lake on Thursday and buried many workers under the mud and water. A local official from the Information Ministry reported on Friday that the death toll so far was 161, while 43 people remain in hospital. According to the official, half of the victims are yet to be identified, and there are many migrants living in a small tent beside the mine. A ceremony to deliver financial aid for the families of the victims was set to be held on Friday, according to local authorities. And we've come to the end of this news brief, but you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. You can also join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Katrina Goss, and thank you for watching.
This July 5th, the people of the Dominican Republic